In 1908, something exploded over Siberia with the force of 185 nuclear bombs. It left no crater, no fragments, and no explanation that science has ever fully agreed on. June 30th, 1908, the most remote wilderness on Earth. Something was coming, and nothing in that forest had any warning. Passengers on the Trans-Siberian Railway saw a blinding light fill the horizon at dawn. The shockwave hit the train 3 minutes after the flash and knocked people from their seats. The Evenki people closest to the explosion saw the sky split open with fire. Their oral accounts described it the same way for generations. The sky burned and the ground shook like thunder. The explosion flattened 2,000 square kilometers of forest in under 2 seconds. The shockwave circled the Earth twice, recorded on barometric instruments in London. From above, the blast zone looked like a perfect geometry lesson written in destruction. Millions of trees pointing outward from a single point, and no crater anywhere. Soloviev arrived at the Tunguska site in 1927, 19 years after the explosion. The fallen trees were still there, and they were pointing in a pattern nobody had predicted. The char pattern on the bark did not match any known explosion type. Soloviev filled 3 notebooks in the first week, and none of his conclusions made him comfortable. Standing at the epicenter, Soloviev could see the radial pattern stretching to the horizon in every direction. Whatever exploded here, it exploded above the ground, not on it. The soil samples contained magnetic spherules unlike anything in the surrounding terrain. They had come from somewhere else and landed here in 1908. The laboratory analysis confirmed the samples were anomalous. Soloviev wrote in his notebook, "This material did not originate from any known terrestrial source." The Russian government received reports of the explosion 3 days after it happened. The nearest settlement was 60 kilometers away. Nobody had been sent to investigate yet. Cole found the energy calculation buried in a 1960s Soviet research paper nobody had cited in 40 years. The number it contained was so large he ran it 3 times before he believed it. The seismological comparison confirmed it. The 1908 Tunguska event released more energy than any natural event in recorded human history. The calculation had been sitting in a Soviet archive for 60 years. Hunt received the intelligence briefing at 11 p.m. and was on a plane by 3 a.m. The file described classified Soviet Tunguska research that had never been acknowledged publicly. The Russian archive building had records nobody had requested access to since 1991. Hunt was the first Western intelligence officer to be given entry in 35 years. The newly declassified Soviet files confirmed what Soloviev had always suspected. Multiple separate Soviet research teams had reached the same conclusion, and all of them had been silenced. The elderly Evenki elder told Soloviev what her grandmother had witnessed in 1908. She said the sky did not just burn, it opened, and something came through before it closed. Cole's whiteboard calculations showed the energy release of the Tunguska event exceeded every known asteroid impact of comparable size by a factor of 12. The numbers did not match any natural explanation he had been trained to accept. Hunt stood at the epicenter and understood for the first time why this place had been classified. It was not what happened here that was secret. It was what the evidence implied. The 1908 London barometric chart showed a pressure wave that circled the Earth twice. Cole pointed to it and said, "Only one type of event produces a double pressure wave like this." Hunt's briefing to CIA officials lasted 3 hours. When she finished, the room was silent for 14 seconds before anyone spoke. Cole spread his calculations across the table and Soloviev read every line without speaking. Then Soloviev opened his notebook and showed Cole what the 1927 expedition had found and never published. The Soviet facility Soloviev was escorted through had been operational since 1953. It had been studying Tunguska samples continuously for 70 years officially. It did not exist. Hunt and Solov met in that parking structure because the building above them had ears. Solov handed her a USB drive and said, "Everything the Soviets found is on this." The 1908 blast zone fell silent within minutes of the explosion. No birds, no insects, no wind. Just 2,000 square kilometers of fallen trees and absolute silence. 2,000 square kilometers flattened into seconds. No crater, no fragments, no explanation. 115 years of research, and science still cannot agree on what happened here. Comment: what do you think hit Tunguska in 1908? Cole's 3D model showed the explosion had originated at exactly 8.5 kilometers above the ground. No known asteroid or comet behaves that way on atmospheric entry. The Soviet 1953 document contained one circled paragraph that Hunt read 4 times. It described the recovered material as exhibiting properties inconsistent with any known natural origin. From the helicopter, Solov could see the tree ring anomalies that had appeared decades after the blast. Circular patterns of accelerated growth, centered precisely on the epicenter. Cole showed Hunt the energy calculations, and she asked him one question. He said, "Yes, that is exactly what those numbers mean." For the first time, all 3 of them were in the same room with everything they had found. Solov spread the 1927 field notes beside Cole's modern calculations. They matched perfectly. Solov had stood at this epicenter dozens of times over 30 years. Every time he looked up at the sky, he asked the same question and never received an answer. The Soviet vault had not been opened since 1991. Hunt found it exactly as it had been left. Whatever was inside had been important enough to seal and important enough never to destroy. The 1908 eyewitness account described the object as silent until the last moment, then a sound like tearing fabric, and then nothing. Solov and Cole walked into that institute on opposite sides of a border that had separated their research for decades. They sat down and realized within 10 minutes they had been working toward the same conclusion. Hunt stood at that Moscow window and understood she could not take what she had found through official channels. She called Langley from a burner phone and said, "I need an extraction window." The tree ring anomaly was a perfect circle 340 meters in diameter, centered on the 1908 epicenter. Solov had been studying it for 15 years. Hunt saw it for the first time and said, "This is not natural growth." Cole presented his findings to the conference, and the room went very quiet. 3 senior scientists walked out before he finished. He noted all 3 worked for government agencies. Solov had returned to this river every year for 30 years. He said once, "The Tunguska never gives you everything. It gives you enough to keep coming back." The sealed Soviet box had not been opened since 1953. The seal was still intact. Hunt broke it carefully and understood immediately why it had been kept sealed for 70 years. All 3 of them stood around that table looking at the contents of the Soviet box. Solov said quietly, "I have been looking for this for 30 years." The Soviet sample material sealed since 1953. Crystalline structure unlike any known natural material. 3 separate Soviet research teams found the same thing. All 3 were silenced. Comment: if governments know what caused Tunguska, why are they still hiding it? The particle physics analysis confirmed what Cole had feared since he first ran the numbers. The material in the Soviet samples had no known natural terrestrial or extraterrestrial analog. Hunt placed the evidence envelope on that table and watched the official's face carefully. He read the label, looked up at her, and said, "How many people know about this?" Solov stood at the epicenter at night and looked upward for a long time without moving. He said later, "Standing there in the dark is the only time the question feels close to an answer." The wall display showed 47 classified research entries between 1908 and 2026. Cole pointed to the cluster from 1953 and said, This is where they stopped publishing what they found. Hunt sat in the back row of that conference and counted -1 government intelligence officers she recognized. None of them were scientists, and all of them were watching coal. The crystalline structure in the sample had a geometric regularity that no natural process produces. Solov sketched it in his notebook and sat back and said nothing for 4 minutes. The Siberian facility door opened, and inside was 118 years of classified Tunguska research. Hunt and Solov walked in knowing they had 1 hour before anyone realized where they were. Cole sat alone in that Oxford office at midnight with his own research spread before him. He had spent 40 years looking for the answer, and now that he had found it, he wished he had not. All three of them sat at that UN table and told the world what 118 years of classified research actually contained. The gallery was silent for 22 seconds after they finished. The forest has grown back. The river still runs. The sky above the epicenter looks like any other sky. But something came through it in 1908, and nobody in any government building has ever officially said what it was.